Billionaire laughs at God. Until a car accident leaves him begging for a second chance. The first time Elliott Thorne publicly mocked God was at a charity gala he hadn't wanted to attend. The second time was on national television. By the third time, it had become his brand, the atheist billionaire tech mogul who built an empire on rationality and scoffed at faith. What Elliott didn't know, as he stood at the window of his penthouse on that crisp autumn evening, was that in exactly 72 hours, he would be praying harder than anyone had ever prayed before. Before I continue, please subscribe to my channel. Elliott Thorne had always believed in precisely two things, himself and mathematics. Everything else was negotiable. At 42, he had amassed a fortune that placed him comfortably among the world's 50 wealthiest individuals. Thorne's quantum computing advancements had revolutionized artificial intelligence, and now his company was on the verge of announcing something that would change medicine forever, an AI system capable of predicting disease progression with 98.7% accuracy. Mr. Thorne, your 7 p.m. with the Japanese investors is confirmed, said Amara, his executive assistant, appearing silently at his office door as she always did. Cancel it, Elliott replied without looking up from his tablet. Tell them I'm testing the prototype. They can wait until we announce next week. Amara paused. In the 7 years she'd worked for him, she'd learned to read his moods like weather patterns. Sir, these are the Kyoto Group representatives. They've flown in specifically too. I said cancel it. He finally looked up, his gray eyes sharp beneath his precisely maintained dark hair. And move the press conference to Thursday. I want to do a final review of the data models myself. Yes, sir. Amara retreated, making notes on her tablet. Elliott returned his attention to the financial report on his screen, but his focus had already scattered. He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined his office on the 87th floor. Below him, San Francisco sparkled in early evening light, fog rolling in from the bay, softening the edges of the city. All his. Not legally, of course, but in every way that mattered. Thorne Tech employed over 20,000 people in the Bay Area alone. The Thorne Foundation funded hospitals, research centers, and STEM education initiatives. He even owned the building where he'd once lived in a studio apartment, eating ramen and coding through the night during those early, hungry years. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, Charlotte. James is asking about weekend arrangements. Your assistant isn't responding. Elliott frowned. He'd forgotten about the weekend. His son, his only child, was supposed to stay with him, something that had been scheduled months ago. I'll handle it, he texted back. Charlotte's response came immediately, he misses you. Elliott put the phone down without replying. James was 14 now, increasingly difficult to talk to. The divorce 3 years ago hadn't helped, of course. Neither had Elliott's consuming focus on work. He'd missed James's last 2 birthdays, sending extravagant gifts instead of showing up. The guilt was there, buried beneath layers of rationalizations about providing for his son's future. Sir, Amara's voice came through the intercom. Dr. Lawrence is here for your 7:30. Elliott straightened his custom-tailored jacket. Send him in. Dr. Nathan Lawrence was the scientific heart of Project Oracle, Thorne's medical AI initiative. In his mid-50s with perpetually rumpled clothes and thinning hair, Lawrence had the distracted air of someone whose mind operated on multiple planes simultaneously. The results from the blind trial are in, Lawrence said without preamble, dropping into a chair across from Elliott's desk. Even better than we projected. Oracle identified early markers for pancreatic cancer in 94% of cases, average of 16 months before clinical symptoms appeared. Elliott allowed himself a small smile. And the false positives? Under 2%. Elliott, this is revolutionary. We're talking about saving hundreds of thousands of lives annually. Billions of dollars annually, Elliott corrected. The licensing model alone. Yes, the money, Lawrence waved dismissively. He was one of the few people who could interrupt Elliott. But think about what this means for humanity. Early detection of the deadliest cancers, prediction of Alzheimer's progression, optimization of treatment protocols. I am thinking about humanity, Nathan. Commercial viability ensures widespread adoption. Philanthropy has its limits. Lawrence studied him, then sighed. There's something else you should know. We ran the model on your own medical data. Elliott's posture stiffened imperceptibly. I don't recall authorizing that. You didn't. I took the initiative. Lawrence leaned forward. Oracle flagged some anomalies in your last 3 physicals. Nothing definitive, but... Enough. Elliott raised a hand. If you've compromised project security to play doctor with my personal information, we have bigger problems. Elliott, this isn't just... We announce Thursday, Elliott cut him off. Make sure the demonstration is flawless. And Nathan? Don't ever access my medical records again. After Lawrence left, Elliott remained motionless behind his desk, staring at the doorway. He'd built his empire on data, on knowing the unknowable before others did. Information was his currency. Being the subject of someone else's analysis made his skin crawl. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Amara. Pastor Williams from First Grace called again about your father's memorial contribution. 3rd time this month. Elliott deleted the message. His father had died 6 months ago, a peaceful death in his sleep after a long illness. Thomas Thorne had been a devoted Christian, a fact that had created an unbridgeable gap between father and son in the last decade of his life. At the funeral, Pastor Williams had spoken about Thomas's unwavering faith even in his darkest hours. Elliott had sat in the front row, dry-eyed and impatient, calculating the business cost of the day away from the office. His father had left a substantial portion of his modest estate to First Grace Church, with a request that Elliott match the donation. Elliott had ignored the request, just as he'd ignored his father's attempts to discuss spirituality in his final years. There's no mathematical proof for God, Elliott had told him during their last real conversation. And I don't invest in ventures without evidence of return. His father had looked at him with something between pity and resignation. Some investments can't be calculated on a balance sheet, son. Elliott pushed the memory away and pressed the intercom. Amara, have the car brought around. And call the Majestic, tell them I'll need the private dining room tonight. Guests, sir? No. The thought of company exhausted him suddenly. Just me. The Majestic occupied the top floor of a historic building downtown, offering panoramic views and privacy for San Francisco's elite. Elliott dined there at least weekly, always at the same table, always ordering off menu. The staff catered to his preferences with choreographed precision, appearing only when needed and disappearing just as efficiently. Tonight, he barely tasted the perfectly seared Wagyu or the 1982 Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His mind was caught between Project Oracle's impending launch and the unwelcome reminder of his father's posthumous expectations. Mr. Thorne. The restaurant's owner, Michelle, approached with careful deference. Everything satisfactory? Fine, Elliott said, not looking up from his wine glass. Wonderful. I thought you might like to know that Governor Hayes is dining with us this evening. He expressed interest in saying hello. Elliott suppressed a grimace. Samuel Hayes was California's newest governor, a moderate Republican who had won on a platform of technological innovation and traditional values, an increasingly rare combination. He was also a well-known evangelical Christian who frequently spoke about his faith guiding his policies. I'm afraid I'm in the middle of something important, Elliott said. Perhaps another time. Michelle nodded, but before he could retreat, a booming voice called out, Elliott Thorne. The man himself. Governor Hayes approached with the confident stride of a politician, hand already extended. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired and tanned, with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to winning people over. Governor, Elliott stood reluctantly, accepting the handshake. I was just telling Michelle I'm in the middle of some work. Of course, of course. Won't take but a minute of your time. Hayes dismissed Michelle with a nod and sat uninvited across from Elliott. I've been hoping to connect. That medical AI system you're developing, Oracle, is it? Fascinating potential. Elliott's interest sharpened slightly. We haven't released many details yet. I have good sources. Hayes smiled. Listen, I'm putting together a technology advisory council for the state. Healthcare AI is going to need regulatory frameworks, ethical guidelines. I want Thorne Tech at the table. Send the details to my office. We'll consider it. Hayes leaned forward. There's also a prayer breakfast next month. Key industry leaders, policy makers. It would mean a lot to have you there. Elliott's expression cooled. I don't do prayer breakfasts, Governor. Ah, yes. I've heard about your perspective on faith. Hayes's smile remained fixed. Your father was a man of deep conviction. We spoke several times at church events. My father and I disagreed on many things. Elliott took a deliberate sip of wine. Religion being chief among them. Faith isn't about agreement, Mr. Thorne. It's about recognizing there are forces greater than ourselves at work in the universe. With respect, Governor, the only forces I recognize are those that can be measured, predicted, and harnessed. Everything else is storytelling. Hayes studied him. You know, there's an old saying, there are no atheists in foxholes. Fortunately, Elliott replied coolly, I don't plan on being in any foxholes. The governor laughed, but there was something evaluative in his gaze. Life has a way of testing our certainties, Mr. Thorne. I hope you'll reconsider the prayer breakfast. And the advisory council. After Hayes left, Elliott signaled for the check. The encounter had left him irritated, particularly the mention of his father. It seemed Thomas Thorne's ghost was determined to haunt him today. Outside, his driver held the door to the sleek black Tesla. As Elliott slid into the back seat, his phone rang. James. He hesitated, then answered. James. It's late. It's only 9:30, Dad. His son's voice had deepened over the past year, startling Elliott each time they spoke. Mom said you're supposed to let me know about this weekend. Right. About that, I have the Oracle announcement on Thursday, and there'll be follow-up meetings. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. I was thinking, Elliott continued, we could reschedule for the following weekend. I could take you to that aerospace museum you mentioned. That was last year, James said flatly. I'm not really into that anymore. Oh. Well, what are you into these days? Another silence. You'd know if you were around. Elliott pinched the bridge of his nose. James, I'm trying here. Are you? Because it seems like you're trying to get out of seeing me. Again. That's not fair. I have responsibilities, a company to run. Yeah, I know. Thorne Tech is more important than anything. More important than me. I never said that. You didn't have to. Elliott heard the hurt beneath his son's anger, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Numbers, data, probabilities, these were things he understood. The emotional needs of a teenage boy remained as mysterious to him as, well, as faith had been to his father. We'll figure something out, he said finally. I promise. Whatever, James replied, and hung up. The car pulled up to Elliott's building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel. The night doorman nodded deferentially as Elliott strode through the private entrance to the elevator that would take him directly to his penthouse. Alone in the vast, minimalist space with its museum-quality art and spectacular views, Elliott poured himself 2 fingers of rare scotch and walked out onto the terrace. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of the ocean. Far below, the city continued its nightly rhythm, oblivious to the man watching from above. Elliott raised his glass to the dark sky. To measurable returns, he said aloud, an ironic toast to his father's memory. No response came from the heavens. He hadn't expected one. The next morning, Elliott woke at precisely 5 a.m., as he did every day. He completed his usual routine, 30 minutes on the treadmill, a protein shake prepared by his housekeeper, a shower calibrated to his preferred temperature. By 6:15, he was reviewing overnight reports from Thornteca's Asian operations while a driverless car navigated the morning traffic toward his office. The Kyoto Group representatives are quite upset, Amara informed him as soon as he stepped off the elevator. They're threatening to pull their 8-figure investment if you don't meet with them personally. Elliott handed her his empty coffee cup. Schedule them for 9 a.m. 15 minutes, no more. They've already left for the airport. He shrugged. Their loss. Oracle's valuation will triple after Thursday's announcement. There's also a message from Charlotte's lawyer about the custody arrangement. Elliott stopped walking. What about it? She's filing for a modification, citing consistent failure to exercise visitation rights. A flash of anger tightened his jaw. Call Reynolds. Tell him to handle it. And James? He left 3 voicemails overnight. Elliott resumed walking toward his office. I'll call him later. What's on the critical path for Oracle today? Amara smoothly shifted topics, reviewing the day's packed schedule as they entered his office suite. The morning unfolded in a blur of meetings, technical reviews, and crisis management. By noon, Elliott had resolved a supply chain issue threatening production timelines, approved the final press materials for Thursday's announcement, and authorized a strategic acquisition of a small biotech firm with complementary technology. He was reviewing Dr. Lawrence's latest test results when his private line rang. Few people had this number, and fewer still would use it during business hours. Thorne, he answered tersely. Mr. Thorne, this is Pastor Williams from First Grace Church. Elliott's fingers tightened around the phone. How did you get this number? Your father provided it before he passed. I've been trying to reach you through conventional channels for months. Yes, about my father's memorial fund. I received the messages. And yet you haven't responded. The pastor's voice was gentle but firm. Your father was very specific about his wishes. The matching funds would allow us to complete the community health center he was passionate about. Pastor Williams, my father was free to donate his money however he saw fit. I'm equally free to direct mine according to my priorities. He believed very strongly that you would honor this last request. That beneath your public persona, you still respected what he stood for. Elliott leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. My father and I had fundamental disagreements about the nature of reality. I respected him as a person, but I don't share his belief in invisible beings or cosmic scorekeepers. There was a pause on the line. Thomas told me you might say something like that. He asked me to remind you of your promise. The words hit Elliott like a physical blow. The promise, made 26 years ago at his mother's funeral. He had been 16, devastated by her sudden death from an aneurysm. His father, equally shattered, had found strength in his faith. Elliott, in his grief and rage, had promised to try to understand that faith, to keep an open mind about what his father called God's plan. It was a promise he had systematically broken every day since. That was a child's promise, Elliott said coldly. Made under emotional duress. Some would say those are the promises that matter most, Pastor Williams replied. Your father never stopped praying for you, Mr. Thorne. Even in his final days, he believed you would find your way back to what's truly important. I found what's important to me. It just wasn't what he wanted it to be. The health center will serve thousands of underprivileged people in this community. Surely that aligns with your humanitarian initiatives? I fund evidence-based medical research, not faith healing centers. It's a medical clinic, Mr. Thorne. With doctors, nurses, and science-based treatments. The pastor's patients seem to be wearing thin. The only difference is we also offer spiritual support for those who want it. Elliott pinched the bridge of his nose. Send the proposal to my foundation. They'll review it according to our standard criteria. That's the best I can offer. I see. The disappointment in the pastor's voice was palpable. Thomas said you'd say that too. He also said to tell you that he forgives you, and that it's never too late to open your heart. The call ended, leaving Elliott with an unfamiliar discomfort in his chest. He pushed it aside, burying himself in work for the next several hours. By late afternoon, he was reviewing his presentation for Thursday when Amara interrupted. "Sir, your son is here." Elliott looked up, genuinely surprised. "James? Here?" "Yes, in the reception area. He says it's important." For a moment, Elliott considered sending him away, claiming a critical meeting or unavoidable deadline. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the lingering echo of his father's forgiveness, or the memory of James's voice on the phone. "Send him in." James entered cautiously, as if expecting to be turned away at any moment. At 14, he was already nearly as tall as Elliott, though lankier, with Charlotte's warm brown eyes and Elliott's dark hair. He wore the uniform of teenage disaffection, worn jeans, hoodie, expensive sneakers. "Hey, Dad." "James. This is unexpected." Elliott gestured to a chair. "Is everything okay?" James remained standing. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. I took the BART after school." Elliott raised an eyebrow. Charlotte lived in Marin County. James would have had to take a bus to the ferry, then the ferry to San Francisco, then navigate the city's transit system to reach Thorntech headquarters. That's quite a journey. "What's going on?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I need to talk to you about something. Something important." Elliott checked his watch. "I have a call in 10 minutes, but..." "Of course you do." James's expression hardened. "Forget it. This was stupid." He turned to leave, but Elliott rose quickly. "James, wait. Whatever it is, we can discuss it." "Can we?" "Because every time I try to talk to you, you're busy, or distracted, or just not there." The accusation stung because it was true. Elliott gestured to the sitting area in the corner of his office. "Sit down. Please. The call can wait." James hesitated, then dropped onto one of the sleek modern couches. Elliott sat across from him, suddenly aware of how rarely they were alone together. "What's on your mind?" James stared at his hands. "Mom's boyfriend proposed to her." Elliott felt an unexpected twinge. He and Charlotte had been divorced for 3 years, and their marriage had been effectively over for at least a year before that. He knew she had been dating someone, Richard or Robert, some finance guy, but he hadn't paid much attention to the details. "I see. And how do you feel about that?" "How do I feel?" James looked up, incredulous. "I feel like my whole life is changing again and nobody cares what I think. Mom's all excited about planning the wedding, and this guy is talking about us moving into his house in Pacific Heights, and maybe changing schools, and..." He broke off, visibly struggling for composure. "Have you told your mother you're upset?" "She says I'm being selfish. That she deserves to be happy." Elliott nodded slowly. "She does deserve happiness, James." "What about what I deserve?" James's voice cracked slightly. "I barely see you. And now she's creating this whole new family with this guy I barely know." The pain in his son's voice penetrated Elliott's carefully constructed defenses. He had always believed he was providing for James in the ways that mattered: financial security, educational opportunities, a legacy. But sitting across from this struggling young man, he recognized the enormous gap between provision and presence. "James, The intercom buzzed. "Sir, Tokyo is on the line for your 4:30. Elliott hesitated, torn between his son and the obligations that had always taken precedence. "Go ahead," James said bitterly. "Take your call. I'll figure it out myself. Amara, tell Tokyo I'll call them back in an hour." Elliott held his son's gaze. "James, I haven't been the father you need." "I know that." James looked surprised at both the cancelled call and the admission. "I thought I was doing the right thing, focusing on building something that would secure your future. But I missed what was happening right in front of me." You missed everything, James said quietly. My science fair project on quantum computing, the one that won the regional championship? I did that to impress you. You didn't even come. Elliott felt the accusation like a physical blow. I sent Dr. Lawrence to represent me. I didn't want your employee, Dad. I wanted you. The simple truth of it hung in the air between them. Elliott had no defense, no logical argument that could justify his absence. What do you want me to do about your mother's engagement? He asked finally. James shrugged. I don't know. I just don't want to feel like I'm being erased from everyone's life. Like I'm an inconvenience. You're not an inconvenience, James. You're the most important thing in my life. Am I? Really? James looked at him with a directness that reminded Elliott of Charlotte. Because it doesn't feel that way. Before Elliott could respond, Amara appeared at the door, her expression unusually grave. Mr. Thorne, I apologize for the interruption, but Dr. Lawrence is insisting on seeing you immediately. He says it's an emergency regarding Oracle. Elliott felt the familiar pull of work, the gravitational force that had shaped his decisions for decades. But looking at his son, he made a different choice. Tell him to wait. Amara's eyebrows rose slightly. He was quite adamant, sir. And I'm quite clear. This conversation with my son takes priority. Elliott turned back to James. We're not finished here. A small smile flickered across James's face, perhaps the first genuine one Elliott had seen in months. Really? Really? Now, about your mother's fiancé, have you given him a chance? Gotten to know him at all? They talked for nearly 30 minutes, the longest uninterrupted conversation they'd had in years. James described his frustrations, his fears about the changes ahead, and his feelings of abandonment. Elliott mostly listened, recognizing that solutions weren't what his son needed right now. Finally, James checked his phone. I should probably head back. Mom will freak if she realizes I came here alone. I'll have my driver take you home, Elliott said, standing. And James? I'm going to make some changes. Starting with this weekend. I'll clear my schedule, all of it. James looked skeptical. You promise? No emergency meetings or last-minute calls? I promise. Elliott placed a hand on his son's shoulder. And I'm going to talk to your mother about the engagement, make sure your concerns are heard. Thanks, Dad. James hesitated, then gave Elliott an awkward hug, the first in what must have been years. After arranging for James to be driven home, Elliott finally turned his attention to Dr. Lawrence, who was waiting impatiently in the adjacent conference room. This better be important, Nathan. I just had to cut short a crucial conversation with my son. Lawrence looked pale, his normally disheveled appearance even more pronounced than usual. I wouldn't have interrupted if it wasn't critical. We found a fatal flaw in Oracle's predictive algorithm. Elliott's entire body tensed. Explain. The blind tests we've been running? They're showing a statistical anomaly we missed in earlier analyses. Under certain conditions, the system generates false negatives, fails to predict conditions it should catch. What conditions? That's the problem. We can't isolate the pattern yet. It appears random, but statistical analysis suggests it's not. There's a variable we're missing. Elliott paced the length of the conference room. What's the failure rate? Approximately 1 in 1,000 cases. But Elliott, that's 1 in 1,000? Elliott stopped pacing. That's a 99.9% accuracy rate. Better than any diagnostic tool on the market. Lawrence shook his head vehemently. You don't understand. These aren't minor conditions we're missing. In the simulation models, these are catastrophic failures, advanced cancers, imminent cardiac events, rare neurological conditions. People will die, Elliott. All medical diagnostics have margins of error, Nathan. We disclose the limitations, implement monitoring protocols. We need to delay the launch. 6 months minimum, to solve this. Elliott stared at him. Delay? Do you have any idea what that would do to our stock price? The partnerships we've negotiated? The hospitals already integrating with our systems? I'm talking about people's lives. And I'm talking about a technology that will save millions of lives even with this limitation. The greater good. Is that how you'll justify it when the lawsuits start coming in? When the headlines read Thorne Tech AI fails to predict fatal condition? Elliott's jaw tightened. Draft a supplemental disclosure for the announcement. We acknowledge the limitation, frame it as an ongoing refinement process. The launch proceeds as scheduled. Lawrence stared at him in disbelief. I can't support this decision. You don't have to support it. You just have to implement it. Elliott turned toward the door. And Nathan? Not a word of this to anyone outside the core team. I mean it. The drive home that evening was tense, Elliott's mind cycling through contingency plans for handling the Oracle situation. The revelation should have dominated his thoughts, but images of James's face kept intruding, the hurt, the hope, the skepticism about his father's promises. And beneath it all, a nagging discomfort about his father's posthumous message of forgiveness. What exactly was Thomas Thorne forgiving him for? For rejecting his faith? For the arguments they'd had in his final years? Or for something deeper, for becoming the kind of man who would prioritize profit margins over people? Elliott shook his head, dismissing the thought. He was being melodramatic. Oracle would save far more lives than it would miss. The ethical calculation was straightforward. His phone rang. Charlotte. Elliott briefly considered ignoring it, then answered. I assume James made it home safely, he said by way of greeting. Yes, thanks to your driver. Charlotte's voice was cool but not hostile. He told me about your conversation. I'm going to take him this weekend. All weekend. No interruptions. There was a pause. He mentioned that. I have to admit, I'm surprised. I've been neglecting him. That stops now. Another pause. Elliott, is everything okay? This doesn't sound like you. The question irritated him. What doesn't sound like me? Taking responsibility for my son? The sudden change of heart. The dramatic declarations. It's not your usual analytical approach. Maybe I'm evolving. Charlotte's laugh was short and disbelieving. After 15 years of marriage and 3 of divorce, I know you don't change on a dime, Elliott. What's really going on? Nothing's going on. James made me see things differently today. That's all. Well, whatever the reason, he's excited about the weekend. Please don't disappoint him this time. I won't. Elliott's grip tightened on the phone. And Charlotte? Congratulations on your engagement. James mentioned it. Ah. She sounded wary. Yes, Richard proposed last week. James has concerns about how it will affect his life. You might want to talk to him about that. Really talk, not just dismiss his feelings. I haven't dismissed, she stopped herself. You know what? You're right. I could have handled it better. I'll talk to him tonight. The conversation ended on surprisingly civil terms. Elliott found himself thinking about their marriage, how it had started with genuine connection before his ambition and her need for emotional presence had pulled them in opposite directions. Another relationship sacrificed on the altar of his success. As the car pulled up to his building, Elliott made a decision. He would keep his promise to James this weekend, regardless of the Oracle situation. And he would call Pastor Williams in the morning about his father's memorial fund. Not because of any spiritual awakening, but because it was the right thing to do, the kind of action his father would have valued. Small steps toward, what? Redemption seemed too religious a concept. Recalibration, perhaps. A rebalancing of priorities. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, and Elliott stepped into the silent, immaculate space. He loosened his tie and walked to the bar, pouring his customary evening scotch. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was transforming into its nighttime self, buildings illuminated against the darkening sky. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lawrence. "I've drafted the disclosure language. Still think this is a mistake?" Elliott didn't respond. Instead, he walked out onto his terrace, drink in hand. The wind had picked up again, stronger than the previous night. Far below, traffic moved in illuminated streams, people rushing home to families, to connections, to lives outside of work. "To recalibration," he said aloud, raising his glass to the empty air. This time, the universe seemed to answer. A gust of wind, powerful and unexpected, knocked the glass from his hand, sending it shattering onto the terrace floor. Elliott stared at the broken crystal, an odd chill running down his spine. Thursday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the most important announcement of Elliott's career. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by fragmented images, James walking away down an endless corridor, his father standing silent at his mother's grave, broken glass falling in slow motion. He rose earlier than usual, completed his workout with mechanical precision, and was in the office by 5:30 a.m. The Thorne Tech building was already humming with activity, the excitement of launch day palpable among the staff who nodded respectfully as he passed. "Final run-through in 30 minutes, Amara informed him, appearing at his side with his preferred breakfast protein shake. "The venue is set, press confirmed, livestream tested. Dr. Lawrence requested a brief private meeting before we leave." Elliott nodded, scanning the final version of his presentation on his tablet. "And the disclosure addendum?" "Integrated into the technical specifications packet, page 37. He looked up sharply. "Page 37? That's buried." Amara's expression remained professionally neutral. "Legal advised that placement. Prominent enough to be defensible, but not likely to generate immediate questions." Elliott hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Where's Lawrence?" "Waiting in the small conference room." Dr. Lawrence looked like he hadn't slept at all, his eyes red-rimmed behind his glasses. He stood as Elliott entered, his posture tense. "I've been running simulations all night," he said without preamble. "The failure pattern is still eluding us, but I've confirmed the severity. Elliott, we cannot in good conscience move forward with this launch." Elliott closed the door behind him. "Nathan, we've been over this. The disclosure is in place. The benefits far outweigh the risks. That's not a decision for us to make. These are people's lives. And we're going to save millions of them," Elliott countered. "Oracle isn't perfect, no medical technology is. But it's better than anything else available. Would you rather we delay indefinitely while people die from conditions we could have helped detect?" Lawrence ran a hand through his thinning hair. "There's something else. I ran your medical data through the latest model again." Elliott's patience evaporated. "I explicitly told you not to. Oracle flagged a potential aortic aneurysm, Elliott. Similar to what killed your mother." The words hung in the air between them. Elliott felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "That's impossible. My last physical was comprehensive. Top cardiologists, advanced imaging. Early indicators can be subtle. The AI sees patterns humans miss. That's the whole point of Oracle." Elliott turned away, staring out the conference room window at the San Francisco skyline. "Even if that were true, it falls within the margin of error we've identified. A potential false positive. Or a true positive that could save your life." Lawrence's voice softened. "Get it checked, Elliott. Today. After the announcement if you must, but don't ignore this." "I'll consider it." Elliott turned back, his expression hardening. "But the launch proceeds as planned. Are we clear?" Lawrence's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Crystal clear." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Moscone Center, a short drive from Thorne Tech headquarters. By 9:15, Elliott was in his private car, reviewing his talking points one final time. The driver navigated the morning traffic with practiced ease, taking Elliott's preferred route through the financial district. His phone rang. James. Hey, Dad. Just wanted to say good luck with the announcement today. It sounds pretty important. Elliott felt an unexpected surge of warmth. Thanks, James. That means a lot. Mom said I could watch the live stream during study hall. Is it okay if I tell my friends my dad invented it? Elliott smiled, possibly his first genuine smile in days. Of course. Though technically, Dr. Lawrence invented the core algorithm. I just made it commercially viable. Still cool. There was a pause. We're still on for tomorrow, right? Mom said I can come over after school. Absolutely. I've cleared my entire weekend. In fact, I was thinking we could drive up to Tahoe. The cabin hasn't been used in ages. Seriously? That would be awesome. James's excitement was palpable. The cabin has that amazing game room, right? And the boat. If the weather holds, we could take it out on the lake. Yes. I'll pack right after school. This is going to be epic, Dad. After they hung up, Elliott found himself still smiling. The simple joy in his son's voice had momentarily displaced the stress of the launch, the concern about Oracle's flaw, the nagging worry about his own health. The car stopped at a red light, and Elliott glanced out the window. By coincidence, they had stopped directly in front of First Grace Church, where his father had worshipped for decades. The old stone building stood solid and unchanging amid the gleaming high-rises that surrounded it. Elliott stared at it, remembering childhood Sundays when his mother would take him to service while his father sang in the choir. The memories were hazy but warm, the colored light through stained glass, the comforting rhythm of familiar hymns, his mother's hand holding his. After she died, those Sundays had become battlegrounds between father and son. Elliott, angry and hurting, had rejected the faith that seemed to offer his father solace. By the time he left for college, he had embraced rationalism with the fervor of a convert. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara, press already gathering. ETA? Elliott looked away from the church as the light changed and the car moved forward. Take the Montgomery Street route, he instructed the driver. Less traffic. The change in route meant passing through the oldest part of the financial district, where narrow streets and historic buildings created frequent bottlenecks. But Elliott preferred it to the main thoroughfares, especially on days when he needed to collect his thoughts. As they turned onto California Street, his phone rang again. Unknown number. Thorne, he answered tersely. Mr. Thorne, it's Pastor Williams again. The voice was apologetic but determined. I've been informed you contacted the foundation about your father's memorial fund? Elliott sighed. Yes, I've asked them to expedite the review. You should hear something by early next week. That's wonderful news. Your father would be so pleased. I'm not doing it for him, Elliott said, more sharply than he intended. Or for your church. I'm doing it because a community health center aligns with my existing philanthropic priorities. Of course, the pastor replied, his tone suggesting he didn't believe that for a moment. Nevertheless, I wanted to thank you personally. And to extend again the invitation to visit the church. Many of the congregation remember you from when you were young. I appreciate the invitation, but... The rest of his sentence was lost in a cacophony of screeching tires and blaring horns. Elliott looked up just as a delivery truck, running a red light, barreled directly toward his car. Time seemed to slow. He saw the driver's panicked face, the inevitable collision trajectory, the useless attempts of his own driver to swerve out of the way. In that suspended moment, Elliott had a single, crystal-clear thought, I'm not ready. Not ready to die. Not ready to leave James. Not ready to face whatever might, or might not, exist beyond this life. Then time accelerated again as metal met metal with catastrophic force. The impact threw Elliott against his seatbelt, then sideways as the car spun. Glass shattered around him, airbags deployed with explosive force, and the world tilted as the vehicle rolled once, twice, coming to rest on its roof. Pain blazed through Elliott's chest and left arm. He hung upside down, held by his seatbelt, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. Through the shattered window, he could see feet running toward the wreckage, hear distant shouting. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, he remembered Dr. Lawrence's warning about the aneurysm. The pain in his chest wasn't from the crash, it was from inside him, something tearing, something vital giving way. Help, he tried to call, but his voice emerged as a whisper. Please, help me. Darkness gathered at the edges of his vision. As consciousness began to slip away, Elliott Thorne, billionaire, atheist, absent father, did something he hadn't done in 26 years. He prayed. Please, he thought desperately. Please don't let me die. Give me another chance. I'll change. I promise. Please. The darkness claimed him. Elliott was floating, weightless and painless. Around him, soft light pulsed in gentle waves, neither warm nor cold, simply present. He had no sense of his body, yet he was somehow more aware, more alert than he'd ever been. Am I dead? The thought formed without words. Not yet. The answer came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the space around him. Who are you? Elliott asked, though he already knew. Not intellectually, not with the rational mind that had defined his existence, but with a deeper knowing that transcended logic. You know who I am. The presence surrounding him was vast beyond comprehension, yet intimately familiar, like remembering something long forgotten. This isn't possible, Elliott thought. I don't believe in you. A sensation like gentle laughter rippled through the light. Your belief or disbelief changes nothing about my existence, Elliott. Just as denying gravity doesn't prevent you from falling. Memories cascaded through him, his childhood prayers, his mother's faith, his father's patient explanations of a loving creator. Then later memories, his angry rejections, his scientific arguments, his public mockery of religion. I was wrong? The realization should have been devastating, yet in this place, it felt simply like the recognition of truth. You were searching in the wrong places, came the response. Looking for me in equations and evidence, when I was waiting in silence and stillness. What happens now? Elliott asked. Is this judgment? No, Elliott. This is a moment of choice. The light shifted, and suddenly Elliott was watching scenes from his life, not from outside, as a spectator, but reliving them from within, feeling every emotion, every consequence of his actions. He felt his son's loneliness, the pain of each broken promise, each missed milestone. He experienced Charlotte's gradual disillusionment as the ambitious but caring man she married disappeared into work and wealth. He witnessed his employees' fear of his temper, their stress when meeting his impossible standards. Most painful of all, he felt his father's grief, not anger, not disappointment, but deep sorrow that his son had closed himself off from what Thomas Thorne had considered life's greatest gift, faith. I've hurt so many people, Elliott realized. I've wasted so much time. Yes, came the simple response. But time is the one thing I can give you more of. If you choose it. Choose what? To live differently. To see with new eyes. To recognize what truly matters. Elliott felt himself being pulled back, away from the light, towards something heavy and painful and limited. Wait. He called out. I don't understand what you want from me. The answer came not in words but in images, James smiling, Charlotte forgiving, his employees thriving, his father's church serving the community. And underneath it all, a simple truth, love mattered more than success, connection more than achievement, giving more than acquiring. I want to go back, Elliott decided. I want another chance. Then take it, the presence said. But remember this moment, Elliott. Remember what you've seen. The light began to fade, the weightlessness giving way to gravity, to pain, to the confines of a broken body. As consciousness returned, one final message reached him. I've always been with you. I always will be. Whether you acknowledge me or not. Elliott opened his eyes to blinding hospital lights and the steady beep of monitors. A nurse noticed and hurried to his side. Mr. Thorne? Can you hear me? You're at San Francisco General. You've been in an accident. Elliott tried to speak, but his throat was parched, his voice a rasp. The nurse offered him water through a straw. Your son and ex-wife are in the waiting room, she explained. The doctors have been monitoring you closely. You're extremely lucky, the paramedics said if they'd arrived even 2 minutes later, you wouldn't have made it. What? Elliott managed. What happened to me? You were in a car accident. But the real emergency was an aortic dissection, a tear in your aorta. It's similar to an aneurysm. They rushed you into surgery immediately. Dr. Lawrence had been right. Oracle had predicted precisely what nearly killed him. How long? Elliott whispered. You've been unconscious for nearly 36 hours. It's Friday evening now. Friday evening. He had missed the Oracle announcement, missed his weekend with James. My son, Elliott said, struggling to sit up. I need to see my son. Easy, Mr. Thorne. I'll let them know you're awake, but the doctor needs to examine you first. As the nurse left, Elliott sank back into the pillows, overwhelmed by pain and the flood of memories from his near-death experience. Had it been real? A hallucination caused by trauma and medication? Or something else entirely, a glimpse beyond the veil his rational mind had always insisted was the end of existence? The doctor arrived, a calm, efficient woman who checked his vitals and explained the extent of his injuries. The aortic dissection had been caught just in time. Without immediate surgery, he would have died within minutes. She used words like miraculous and extraordinary luck, but Elliott heard something else behind her clinical terminology, second chance. When can I leave? He asked. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Mr. Thorne, you've just undergone major cardiac surgery following a traumatic accident. You'll be here for at least a week, possibly longer. I had plans with my son this weekend, Elliott said, surprised by how small and vulnerable his voice sounded. Important plans. I'm sure he'll understand. Right now, the most important thing is that you're alive to spend many more weekends with him. She patted his arm. I'll send your family in, but only for a few minutes. You need rest. When James and Charlotte entered, Elliott felt his chest tighten with emotion. James's eyes were red and puffy from crying, and even Charlotte looked shaken beneath her composed exterior. Dad. James rushed to the bed, stopping just short of embracing him. They said you almost died. I'm okay, Elliott assured him, reaching for his hand. I'm sorry about our weekend. James stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? I don't care about that. I care that you're alive. We both do, Charlotte added, stepping closer. You gave us quite a scare, Elliott. The doctors say I'm going to be fine, Elliott said, though the pain in his chest suggested recovery would be neither quick nor easy. James, as soon as I'm better, we'll reschedule that trip. I promise. I know, Dad. James squeezed his hand. I believe you. The simple statement, I believe you, hit Elliott with unexpected force. How many promises had he broken to his son over the years? How many times had James learned not to trust his father's word? Yet here he was, offering faith without evidence. Faith. The word echoed in Elliott's mind, connecting to his experience in that in-between place. Faith wasn't just about religion or God, it was about trust, about believing in things beyond proof or calculation. Mr. Thorne needs rest now, the nurse announced from the doorway. You can come back tomorrow. Wait, Elliott said, tightening his grip on James's hand. Charlotte, could you give us a moment alone? She nodded, stepping outside with the nurse. Elliott looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. James, I need to tell you something important. Elliott's voice was weak but determined. I've been wrong about so many things. The way I prioritized work over you. The way I've treated people. All of it. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because I almost died without saying it. Elliott took a painful breath. You are the most important person in my life. Not Thorne Tech, not Oracle, not any of it. You. And I'm going to spend whatever time I have left proving that to you. James blinked back tears. The doctor said you're going to be fine. I will be. But fine is going to mean something very different from now on. Elliott managed a small smile. How would you feel about spending more time at the Tahoe cabin? Maybe even a few months this summer? I could work remotely. James's eyes widened. Seriously? But what about Thorne Tech? Thorne Tech will survive without me micromanaging every decision. Elliott squeezed his son's hand. Some things are more important than business, James. I should have learned that a long time ago. After James left, Elliott lay alone in the hospital room, processing everything that had happened. The monitors beeped steadily, marking each heartbeat he'd nearly lost. Outside his window, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to one man's transformation. Elliott closed his eyes, trying to recapture the sensation of that otherworldly light, that presence that had seemed to know him better than he knew himself. Had it been real? Or just the last firing of synapses in a dying brain? The scientist in him demanded evidence, measurements, reproducible results. But something else, something older and deeper, whispered that some truths existed beyond the reach of instruments and equations. I don't know if you're there, Elliott whispered to the empty room. I don't know if what I experienced was real. But if it was. I'm listening now. No dramatic sign appeared. No voice spoke from the heavens. But in the quiet of that hospital room, Elliott Thorne felt something he hadn't felt since childhood: peace. Recovery was neither quick nor easy. The combination of the car accident injuries and the cardiac surgery kept Elliott hospitalized for 2 weeks, followed by months of rehabilitation. For a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment, the dependence on medical staff and later, home health aides, was a humbling experience. But as spring turned to summer, Elliott found himself changing in ways that went beyond the physical healing. The near-death experience, vision or hallucination, he still couldn't definitively say, had shaken loose something calcified within him, creating space for growth where before there had been only rigid certainty. James visited daily during the hospital stay, bringing schoolwork to complete at Elliott's bedside, sharing stories about his day, reconnecting in ways they hadn't in years. Charlotte came regularly too, setting aside past conflicts to support both her son and her ex-husband through the recovery process. On a warm June afternoon, Elliott sat on the deck of his Tahoe cabin, watching James water ski across the lake. His chest still ached occasionally, a physical reminder of his brush with mortality, but the doctors were pleased with his progress. The cabin's isolation, once something he'd avoided as it kept him away from work, had become a sanctuary, a place to heal both body and relationships. He's gotten good at that, Charlotte observed, joining Elliott on the deck with 2 glasses of lemonade. She had driven up for the weekend, staying in the guest house to spend time with James. Her engagement ring caught the sunlight as she handed Elliott a glass. Thanks to Richard's lessons, apparently, Elliott replied, with only a trace of the jealousy he might have felt months ago. James says he's actually pretty cool for an old guy. Charlotte laughed. High praise from a teenager. She settled into the chair beside him. Speaking of which, the school called. James's grades have improved dramatically this quarter. All A's and BS. He's been working hard. Elliott watched as James executed a perfect turn behind the boat. And I think having stability helps. Knowing where he stands with everyone. Charlotte studied him over the rim of her glass. You've changed, Elliott. I keep waiting for you to revert to form, for the workaholic to re-emerge, but it hasn't happened. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying priorities. Elliott offered a wry smile. Though I won't pretend it's been easy. Amara still forwards me about 50 urgent emails a day that I force myself not to answer immediately. How is the company doing with you working remotely? Better than I expected. Lawrence is running the technical side brilliantly. The board grumbled at first, but the quarterly numbers have kept them quiet. Elliott turned to face her. I should have delegated years ago. Including when we were married. Charlotte's expression softened. We both made mistakes, Elliott. I could have been more understanding of your ambition. You understood it fine. You just recognized what I didn't, that it was consuming everything else. Elliott set down his glass. I've been thinking about something James said a few weeks ago. About feeling erased from our lives. He seems much happier now. He does. But it made me realize how many other people I've erased over the years. Employees I saw as functions rather than humans. Competitors I crushed without consideration for the consequences. Even my father, whose beliefs I dismissed because they didn't fit my worldview. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Are you getting religious on me, Elliott Thorne? Because that would truly be the most shocking transformation of all. He laughed. Not exactly. But I've been reconsidering some things. Questioning assumptions I've held for decades. Like what? Elliott watched as James waved enthusiastically from the water. Like whether the material world is all there is. Whether success can be measured purely in dollars and achievements. Whether some forms of knowledge might come through channels other than data and evidence. That doesn't sound like the man I was married to. It's not, Elliott admitted. That man was certain he had all the answers. I'm finding there's a strange freedom in recognizing how little I actually know. Before Charlotte could respond, James signaled for the boat to return to the dock. Elliott rose to help him in, his movements still slower and more deliberate than before the accident. That evening, after Charlotte had returned to the guest house and James had gone to bed, Elliott sat alone on the deck, watching the stars emerge over the lake. The vastness of the night sky had once seemed to him merely an exercise in astronomical measurements, distance, luminosity, chemical composition. Now it stirred something else, wonder. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lawrence, quarterly board meeting next week. Your physical presence requested. Critical decisions pending on Oracle 2.0. Elliott stared at the message, feeling the familiar pull of Thorne Tech, of the empire he'd built. In the immediate aftermath of his accident, the company had delayed Oracle's launch, ostensibly due to Elliott's medical emergency but actually to address the algorithmic flaw Lawrence had identified. The revised system had debuted 2 months later with appropriate limitations and warnings clearly stated, a more honest, if less spectacular, introduction to the market. I'll be there, Elliott replied after a moment's consideration. But only for the day. I'm coming back to Tahoe afterward. He set the phone aside and looked back at the stars. Somewhere in the house, James's phone chimed with an incoming message. Moments later, Elliott heard his son's footsteps on the deck. Can't sleep? Elliott asked as James dropped into the chair beside him. Too much energy. James grinned. Plus Richard just sent me a link to this crazy good boat he thinks we should check out next weekend. You like him, don't you? James shrugged. He's okay. He makes Mom happy, and he's not trying to be my dad or anything. He knows that's your job. Elliott felt a surge of affection for his son, this perceptive young man who had somehow maintained his capacity for connection despite his father's emotional absence. I'm going to San Francisco for a board meeting next week, Elliott said. Would you want to come along? We could visit the Academy of Sciences afterward, maybe get dinner at that sushi place you like. Sure. James hesitated. Are you going to stay? In San Francisco, I mean. Now that you're better. The question revealed the lingering insecurity beneath James's newfound confidence in their relationship. Elliott turned to face him directly. I'm coming back here. With you. For the rest of the summer, at least. He smiled. After that, we'll figure something out. Maybe split our time between here and the city. But I'm not going back to how things were before, James. I promise you that. James nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I kind of like having a dad again. The simple statement hit Elliott with the force of revelation. A dad again. Not a provider, not a distant authority figure, but a father, present, engaged, loving. After James went back to bed, Elliott remained on the deck, contemplating the changes of the past months. His near-death experience had torn away the illusion of control he'd maintained for decades, revealing a more complex and nuanced reality beneath. Whether that experience had been divine intervention or neurochemical reaction seemed less important than the truth it had revealed. He had been living wrongly, valuing the wrong things, hurting those he should have cherished. The following week, Elliott returned to Thorne Tech headquarters for the first time since his accident. The familiar glass and steel tower felt simultaneously intimate and foreign, like revisiting a childhood home as an adult. Employees stared as he walked through the lobby, whispers following in his wake. He looked different, thinner, his hair now streaked with gray, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. Amara met him at the elevator, her professional composure momentarily breaking as she took in his appearance. "Welcome back, Mr. Thorne. The board is assembled in the main conference room." "Thank you, Amara." Elliott smiled at her, really smiled, not the tight, perfunctory expression he'd typically offered in the past. "And thank you for everything you've done during my recovery. I couldn't have managed without you." She blinked in surprise. "Just doing my job, sir." "No, you went far beyond that. And I want you to know it's appreciated." The board meeting proceeded with a mixture of familiar corporate ritual and subtle new dynamics. The directors, accustomed to Elliott's dominating presence, seemed unsure how to react to his more measured, thoughtful approach. When Dr. Lawrence presented the latest Oracle performance metrics, Elliott listened attentively without interrupting. "The transparency regarding system limitations has actually enhanced user trust," Lawrence concluded. "Hospitals report higher satisfaction compared to other AI diagnostics precisely because we're clear about what Oracle can and cannot do." "And the failure rate?" Elliott asked. "Down to 0.3% and decreasing as the system continues to learn. We've implemented the safeguards we discussed, human oversight for all critical cases, redundant testing protocols. No catastrophic failures to date." Elliott nodded. "Excellent work, Nathan." The remainder of the meeting focused on strategic planning for the next fiscal year. When the discussion turned to international expansion, Elliott found himself less interested in profit projections and more concerned with ethical implications. "Before we move into developing markets," he said, interrupting a particularly aggressive proposal from the head of global strategy, "I want a comprehensive analysis of healthcare infrastructure in each target region. Oracle isn't just a product, it's a responsibility. We need to ensure it helps reduce healthcare disparities rather than exacerbate them." The silence that followed was profound. The Elliott Thorne they knew would have focused exclusively on market penetration and revenue potential. "That's a different approach than we've typically taken," the strategy director said carefully. "Yes, it is." Elliott's tone made it clear the matter wasn't open for debate. "Prepare the analysis for our next meeting." After the board adjourned, Dr. Lawrence lingered behind, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "You really meant what you said in the hospital," he observed. "About changing your approach?" Elliott nodded. "I did. Though I suspect some of the board thinks I've suffered brain damage along with the cardiac issues." Lawrence chuckled. "Change makes people uncomfortable, especially when it contradicts their expectations." He hesitated. "Elliott, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. About what happened during your surgery." "You mean did I have a near-death experience?" Elliott raised an eyebrow. "Would you believe me if I said yes? 6 months ago, probably not. But now?" Lawrence shrugged. "The universe seems to contain more mysteries than either of us accounted for in our calculations." Elliott smiled. "Indeed it does." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. I promised James we'd visit the Academy of Sciences this afternoon." "Of course. Family first, another change I never expected to see." Lawrence extended his hand. "It suits you, by the way. This new perspective." Later, as Elliott and James explored the rainforest dome at the Academy, Elliott found himself observing his son with a sense of wonder similar to what he felt contemplating the stars. The mathematical precision of a butterfly's wing pattern, the evolutionary marvel of a poison dart frog's coloration, these were still scientific phenomena, explainable through natural processes. But somehow, they now seemed to point toward something larger, something beyond the mere mechanics of biology. "Dad, check this out," James called, pointing to a blue morpho butterfly that had landed nearby. "The color isn't pigment, it's structural. The microscopic scales on the wings reflect light at specific wavelengths, creating what appears to be perfect blue." Elliott nodded, impressed by his son's knowledge. "But it's actually an illusion." "Is it, though?" James looked thoughtful. "I mean, if our brains perceive it as blue, and everyone agrees it's blue, isn't it real in every way that matters?" The question, so philosophical from his practical-minded son, caught Elliott by surprise. "That's a profound observation, James. The difference between objective reality and perceived experience." James shrugged, slightly embarrassed by the praise. "Just something my science teacher talked about." He moved on to examine a tropical plant, but Elliott remained momentarily frozen, struck by the parallel to his own evolving understanding of reality. Was his near-death experience, that encounter with light and presence, merely an illusion created by a dying brain? Or was it, like the butterfly's blue, real in every way that mattered? The question followed him through the remainder of their museum visit, through dinner at James's favorite restaurant, and back to the Tahoe cabin the following day. It lingered as summer progressed, as Elliott gradually increased his involvement with Thorne Tech while maintaining his commitment to James, as their relationship deepened and healed. By August, Elliott had established a new routine that balanced limited work hours with family time. 3 days a week in San Francisco, 4 at the cabin. Video conferences instead of constant travel. Delegating decisions he would once have insisted on controlling personally. The company continued to thrive, in some ways, better than before, and Elliott found himself more satisfied with this balanced success than he had been with his previous all-consuming approach. On a warm Sunday morning, Elliott sat on the deck with his coffee, reviewing quarterly projections on his tablet. James had gone into town with friends, leaving Elliott alone with his thoughts. A notification appeared on his screen, a calendar reminder he didn't recognize. Thomas Thorne Memorial Health Center dedication, 2 p.m. Elliott stared at the notification. The community health center his father had envisioned, funded in part by Elliott's matching contribution, was opening today. Pastor Williams had invited him to the dedication weeks ago, but Elliott had declined, citing prior commitments. Apparently, Amara had added it to his calendar anyway. He set down his tablet, gazing out at the lake. First Grace Church was a 3-hour drive from the cabin. If he left now, he could make it just in time for the ceremony. The thought made him unexpectedly nervous. He hadn't set foot in a church since his father's funeral. What would it mean to go back now, after everything that had happened? Would it signal an acceptance of faith he wasn't sure he fully embraced? Or would it simply be honoring his father's memory through a project that genuinely benefited the community? Elliott made his decision. He left a note for James explaining his absence, then got into his car, not the chauffeured luxury vehicle of his pre-accident life, but a more modest SUV he now drove himself. As he navigated the mountain roads towards San Francisco, he found himself rehearsing what he might say if asked about his beliefs, about the changes in his life since the accident. The truth was, he didn't have a neat explanation. He hadn't experienced a dramatic religious conversion. He hadn't suddenly embraced all the dogmas he'd previously rejected. But something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of reality, opening him to possibilities beyond the strictly material worldview he'd championed for decades. First Grace Church looked smaller than Elliott remembered, its stone facade weathered but dignified. A crowd had gathered on the adjacent property where the new health center stood, a modern building with large windows and welcoming architecture. Elliott parked across the street, watching from a distance as Pastor Williams addressed the assembled community members. He wasn't planning to announce his presence. It felt sufficient to witness the realization of his father's vision, to acknowledge silently his part in making it happen. But as he stood there, a voice called his name. "Elliott Thorne?" Is that really you? He turned to find an elderly woman studying him with bright, curious eyes. It took a moment to place her, Mrs. Abernathy, his father's neighbor for decades, a fixture at the church since Elliott's childhood. Mrs. Abernathy, he acknowledged with a nod. Yes, it's me. My goodness, it's been years. She peered at him more closely. You look different. There's something lighter about you. Elliott smiled. I've been through some changes recently. So I've heard. That terrible accident. She shook her head. Your father always said God wasn't finished with you yet. Looks like he was right. Before Elliott could respond, she was taking his arm, guiding him toward the crowd with surprising strength for her age. Come along. You should be up front for this. It wouldn't have happened without your contribution. Elliott found himself reluctantly following, aware of the whispers and stares as people recognized him. Pastor Williams, in the middle of his speech, faltered momentarily when he spotted Elliott in the crowd, then recovered with a warm smile. And speaking of blessings, the pastor continued, I see we've been joined by Thomas Thorne's son, Elliott, whose generous matching contribution made this health center possible. Perhaps he would say a few words? Elliott felt a moment of panic as all eyes turned to him. He had not prepared for this, had not intended to participate. But something, perhaps the same something that had drawn him here in the first place, compelled him forward. Standing before the crowd, Elliott looked at the building that bore his father's name. A simple plaque by the entrance read, Thomas Thorne Memorial Health Center, serving all in need. My father and I disagreed on many things, Elliott began, his voice steady despite his discomfort. But we shared a belief in helping others, though we expressed it differently. He showed his love for humanity through faith and service. I chose technology and innovation. For most of my life, I thought these approaches were incompatible, that one had to be right and the other wrong. Elliott paused, gathering his thoughts. A few months ago, I had an experience that changed my perspective. I won't go into details, but it made me reconsider many of my assumptions about reality, about what matters in life, about the limits of what we can know through science alone. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Elliott saw Pastor Williams nodding encouragingly. This health center represents what's possible when we move beyond our certainties and find common ground. It will provide evidence-based medical care to people who need it, regardless of their ability to pay. But it will also offer something my father understood was equally important, compassion, community, a sense of being valued as a human being rather than a collection of symptoms. Elliott gestured toward the building. I'm still not sure about many things my father believed. I don't know if there's a God watching over us, or if the light some people experience in near-death situations is divine presence or neurochemical reaction. But I've learned that certainty can be a limitation rather than a strength. Sometimes, the most rational position is to remain open to possibilities beyond our current understanding. He took a deep breath, feeling strangely emotional. My father would be proud of this place, not because it bears his name, but because it will ease suffering and offer hope. And in the end, whether motivated by faith or reason, that's what matters most. As Elliott stepped back, the crowd applauded warmly. Pastor Williams embraced him, whispering, Thomas is smiling down on this moment, Elliott. I'm certain of it. Elliott didn't contradict him. Instead, he simply said, Thank you for persisting with me, Pastor. My father chose his friends wisely. After the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elliott toured the facility, impressed by the thoughtful design and comprehensive services. As people began to disperse, he found himself drawn to the church next door, its doors open and welcome. He hesitated on the threshold, feeling a strange mixture of resistance and longing. Then, making a decision, he stepped inside. The sanctuary was empty and quiet, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows to create pools of colored light on the wooden pews. Elliott moved slowly down the central aisle, memories washing over him, his mother's hand in his father's voice in the choir, Christmas services, and Easter mornings from a childhood that now seemed to belong to someone else. He sat in a pew near the front, in the spot where his family had always sat. The silence enveloped him, not uncomfortable but expectant, as if the space itself was listening. "I don't know if you're there," Elliott said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken in the hospital months ago. "I don't know if what I experienced was real or imagination. I don't have the faith my father had." He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he still didn't fully understand. "But I'm open to the possibility. And I'm grateful, for my life, for my son, for the chance to change. If that gratitude needs a recipient, then consider this my acknowledgement." No dramatic sign appeared. No voice spoke from the heavens. But as Elliott sat in that quiet church, he felt again what he had begun to recognize in recent months: peace. Not the absence of questions or doubts, but a deeper calm that existed alongside them, making space for both certainty and mystery, for both knowing and wondering. When he finally rose to leave, Elliott noticed a small plaque on the pew where he'd been sitting. In memory of Margaret Thorne, it read, his mother's name. His father must have dedicated it after her death, creating a permanent marker of her presence in this place that had meant so much to her. Elliott touched the plaque gently, then turned and walked out of the church into the bright afternoon sunlight. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "Where are you? I got your note, but you didn't say where you went." "I went to see something important," Elliott replied. "I'll tell you about it when I get home." "Make dinner reservations at that Italian place on the lake for 7:30? "Already did," came the immediate response. "See you then." Elliott smiled, pocketing his phone as he walked to his car. The future stretched before him, uncertain, complex, full of questions he might never fully answer. But for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that uncertainty felt not like a problem to solve, but like an adventure to embrace. As he drove away from First Grace Church, Elliott Thorne, billionaire, father, seeker, felt a lightness he had never known in all his years of certainty. Whatever waited ahead, in this life and perhaps beyond, he would face it with open eyes and an open heart, no longer laughing at what he couldn't explain, but wondering at what he had yet to understand.